Have you ever felt like something deep inside you has changed, but you can't quite explain what? As if the world still looked the same, but was on a different frequency. As if something old had been removed. And now, suddenly, you've started seeing with different eyes. Well, I need to tell you something that maybe no one has told you yet. You were reborn, and you didn't even realize it. Your soul went through an invisible process, silent, sacred, and now that the cycle has been completed, you were guided to this very moment, because this is where the remembering begins. This video didn't show up by accident. What alchemy has taught for centuries is that awakening doesn't start with noise. It starts with recognition. And if this is making sense to you, it's because you're no longer at the beginning of the journey. You're in the return to who you've always been before you forgot. And today, we're going to reveal the hidden map of this journey. The 7 stages of the great alchemical work that represent, step by step, the true rebirth of the soul. He who does not make his inner self one with his outer self, and his outer self one with his inner self, will never attain the philosopher's stone. Hermes Trismegistus. Did you know that on March 25th, 2025, time started over? No, I'm not talking about the calendar you hang on the wall, or the one that tells you when to pay bills or schedule appointments. I'm talking about real time. Soul time. On that day, a new cycle began in the Tzolkin Calendar, an ancient system used by the Maya that doesn't measure days as numbers, but as fields of living energy, a kind of coded matrix where each day carries a specific frequency, as if each date had its own spirit, a mission, a vibration. And the first spirit to greet us in this new cycle was the magnetic dragon. And if you think that's just symbolic, hold on. The dragon is the archetype of birth. The cosmic womb, the spark that ignites the first breath. It holds the power of raw, primitive, original creation. It represents the moment when the invisible decides to become visible, when energy chooses to turn into matter, when the soul, after wandering in the dark, chooses to reincarnate in you. If during this period you felt more sensitive, if you felt a strange calling to start something new, if relationships fell apart or old projects simply died without explanation, you weren't losing it. You were being reborn. The Tzolkin is made up of 260 days, and that number wasn't chosen by accident. The Maya knew something that science is only now beginning to suspect. The time of human gestation also lasts, on average, 260 days. Nature follows this rhythm. So does the soul. You are in the middle of a cycle of energetic gestation. You might not see an umbilical cord, but there's an invisible flow connecting your current consciousness to a higher self. More awakened, that's about to emerge. And you know what's even crazier? The medieval alchemists knew this too, but they called this process something else. Opus magnum, the great work. It wasn't about physical gold. It was about inner gold. They said a human being had to go through 7 stages to become truly whole, but the start of it all, the first spark of transmutation, always came after chaos. Just as the soul needs the womb, gold needs fire, and the new self needs to die before it can be born. Now, connect the dots. Have you felt like a lot has been dying inside you in recent months? Felt endings, closures, crises, lost interest in things that used to define you? All of that was preparation. It wasn't bad luck, it was alchemy. This new cycle, now underway, is calling you into a new state of being. And it's already begun. You're not at the beginning, you're after the beginning. The birth already happened, you just haven't noticed yet. But the universe has. And now, everything around you is starting to respond in a different way. Ordinary time demands deadlines. Soul time demands awareness. And awareness is when you stop dragging yourself through life and start walking with purpose. If the old you is still trying to stay in control, well, they're not in charge anymore. Now the real you has been born, and the world is going to have to adapt. Alchemy is a mirror of life. If your soul has been reborn, then the world around you will start to respond differently, not with explosions or cinematic miracles, but with small signs, subtle intuitions, inner movements you can't quite explain. Because when something changes inside, the outer reality has no choice. It rearranges itself. But the question almost no one asks is, how does that happen? And that this is where the wisdom of the alchemists comes in. Behind the ancient images, the medieval laboratories, and the legends about gold, there's a hidden truth. Alchemy was never about material wealth. It was always about life, about the human being, about the soul. And one of its simplest teachings is also one of the most powerful. Nothing can be transformed if there's nothing to be transformed. That means the new can't be born out of nothing. Transformation needs a starting point, a fragment, a seed, a spark. The ancient alchemists said that to transform any metal into gold, there had to already be a small particle of gold present, a trace, a sign of what the matter could become. In life, it's exactly the same. You want to evolve, you want to awaken? Then know this, it only happens because there's already something inside you that's ready. That already knows. That was only waiting for space, time, and awareness to emerge. And to illustrate that, let me tell you a short story. They say that in a forgotten village there was an old blacksmith. A simple, quiet man who shaped tools and tended to the forges as if he were tending to a temple. But what no one knew was that, in secret, he was also an alchemist. One day, a young man came to him, holding a piece of dark, dull, lifeless metal in his hands. His eyes were tired, his voice trembling. "This is all I have," the young man said. "They told me you can turn metal into gold. But this piece, it's useless." The blacksmith looked at it calmly, weighed the metal in his hands, and after a deep silence he replied, "You've brought something precious, but it's not enough." The young man got upset. "But it's all I have." Then the blacksmith said, "For the fire to know what to do, it needs a point of reference, a minimal trace of gold, a sign, not because the gold will be used in the process, but because it's the map. It teaches the matter what it can become." The young man, not quite sure what he was looking for, searched his pockets, his belongings, and finally, from an old medallion inherited from his grandfather, he took out a small golden fragment. The blacksmith smiled. "Now we're ready." That night, the fire was lit, and by dawn, what once looked like a useless piece of metal had become something rare, luminous, and pure. The grain of gold remained intact, but without it, nothing would have happened. That is the metaphor of the soul. You don't have to be ready, you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to recognize that within you, there already exists a trace of who you're becoming. And with that memory now awakened, we can enter the deepest stages of spiritual rebirth, because true alchemy is a process, and that process has a name, the Great Work. Now that the gold within you has begun to awaken, we'll walk together through the 7 stages of soul transmutation. 1. The inner fire of calcination. And it's precisely that small fragment that ignites the flame, because fire only recognizes what already carries the memory of gold. But before the soul can become living gold, it must go through a process that almost no one wants, but no one can avoid. It is the first stage of the great work, calcination. And if you felt like everything started to fall apart lately, if relationships broke down, if certainties vanished, if the ground disappeared beneath your feet, that wasn't punishment, or bad luck, or chaos. It was fire. In the language of alchemy, to calcine is to burn what no longer serves. It's to throw into the fire everything that was excess, pride, masks, control, fear, inflated ego, too much expectation. The soul enters this invisible furnace to burn off its shells, and what's left isn't the end, it's the beginning. Life, then, follows this same cycle. You start off thinking everything's under control. You cling to your titles, your name, what you've achieved, the certainties you've built. But at some point, the universe looks at you and asks, is all of this who you are? Or is it who you've learned to appear to be? And if the answer is appearance, the fire comes, not as punishment, but as an invitation. Calcination arrives when you can no longer sustain the illusion. Sometimes it comes as an unexpected job loss, a painful breakup, a diagnosis, a family conflict. Sometimes nothing happens on the outside, but inside, everything starts to scream. You no longer recognize yourself in the life you've created. The mirror reflects someone who feels far from who you were born to be. And that's when the fire begins. But alchemy never taught that fire destroys just to destroy. It transforms, it reveals. Do you remember the phoenix? That bird that's reborn from its own ashes? It's the perfect symbol of calcination, because it needs to die in order to remember who it really is. The fire consumes the old feathers, the broken wings, the blurred vision, so the new form can emerge. You weren't burned, you were revealed. What burned wasn't you. It was the weight you'd been carrying without realizing. It was the character, the mold, the programming, the image you held onto because you thought you had to. And now that the fire has passed, you begin to see the embers of what remains. And what remains is what is true. 2. Dissolution and chaos. And when the fire finishes its work, what remains is not stability. It's the opposite. This is where the second stage of transformation begins, and it comes as water. Water that seeps through the cracks left by the fire. Water that doesn't ask for permission to enter. It simply enters. And at this point, you have no more ground beneath you. You enter the stage of dissolution. It's as if everything that once defined you begins to slowly dissolve. Your beliefs, your certainties, your identities. That name you once carried with pride no longer makes sense. That role you held as if it were a throne now feels like just a part you were playing. You begin to realize you no longer know exactly who you are, and that scares you. But here's a spiritual truth that few people have the courage to face. This confusion is not a problem, it is a portal. Dissolution is the moment when the soul returns to the womb. The ego, already burned in the fire, now dives into the water, not to drown, but to remember what was hidden in the depths. It's in this liquid state that the unconscious begins to rise. Strange dreams, feelings you can't explain, emotions that come out of nowhere, old memories, traumas you thought you had already healed. All of this surfaces because now there's space. What was once kept under control, locked away, hidden, begins to move. You are no longer who you were, but you still don't know what you're becoming. That's it. This is the space between worlds, and here, fighting is useless. The more you try to cling to what was, the more you suffer. Alchemy is not about control, it is about surrender. You don't control water, you learn to flow with it. Dissolution forces you to feel, to stop thinking you have all the answers, and start truly listening to yourself. This moment might feel like the most confusing of all, because nothing has form. Everything is in transition. But that's exactly why it's sacred. It's in water that life begins. It's in water that chaos turns into creation. It's in water that essence at last can breathe. 3. Separation. And it's in this silent dive where everything loses its form that something begins to emerge. Not in a rush, not with noise, but like someone waking up after a long sleep. You can't explain it, but you start to feel it. There is something in you that's coming back. It's not new, but it's not the same either. That's when we enter the next stage, separation. In alchemy, this is the moment when the alchemist begins to filter what is essential from what is excess. After the chaos of water comes the sieve of discernment. What stays? What needs to go? What truly belongs to you? What did you simply inherit, repeat, or pretend to be? In everyday life, this stage tends to be subtle but transformative. People you once identified with start to feel distant. Conversations that used to make sense now sound empty. Desires that used to guide your life lose their shine. And in return, a no sensitivity begins to surface. You start to perceive environments more clearly. You feel when something is pulling you down. You feel when something is lifting you up. And most importantly, you start to hear an inner voice that had been muffled for a long time. Your own voice. Separation is not rejection. It is clarity. It is not a rupture. It is refinement. It's as if the soul, after burning and dissolving, is now saying, "This is me. This is not. And that process can be frightening, because the mind, used to the familiar, wants to go back to how things were. But you already know what was isn't coming back. Separation is like clearing a fertile field. You don't plant anything while the ground is still full of debris. This is the moment to remove what blocks, to step away from what confuses, so that what is pure in you can finally have space to grow. 4. Conjunction. And when that space finally clears, something magical begins to happen. You no longer need to run from who you were, nor pretend to be someone you're not. The past no longer holds you, and the future doesn't scare you like it used to. You begin to find yourself in the present. It's at this point that conjunction manifests. In alchemy, this is the union of opposites: sun and moon, heaven and earth, reason and intuition, spirit and matter. But this union doesn't happen outside, it happens within. After burning what was false, after dissolving what was fixed, after separating what was noise, now everything that remains begins to reorganize, and what is born from this new arrangement is you, but a version of you that no longer needs to prove anything, that no longer lives to please, that no longer measures itself by someone else's standards. Conjunction is the inner marriage between all the parts of you that you thought had to fight each other. Your rational side, that told you to be logical, and your sensitive side, that cried when no one was watching. Your desire to grow, and your fear of failing, your side that longed for freedom, and the one that craved security. Now, they meet, they talk, they respect each other. You start to realize you don't have to choose one or the other. You can be whole, and being whole is living in reconciliation with everything you are. That's what conjunction is, the awareness that everything within you has its place, that your shadow holds wisdom, and that your light doesn't need to shine for others to see. In this stage, your true identity begins to emerge, and it doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be recognized. It simply is. It's as if, finally, you've come home. 5. Fermentation. And it's in this return to your inner home that something begins to happen. Without warning, without logical explanation, without control. You wake up and feel that something has changed, but you can't say what. The world looks the same, but there's a new glow in the details. That conversation with a stranger gives you chills. That old song now makes you cry. And out of nowhere, a desire appears. The desire to create, not to be seen, not to be recognized, but because something inside you needs to be born. This is where the stage of fermentation begins. In alchemy, this moment represents the action of an invisible life within matter. Just as bread needs yeast to rise, just as wine needs time to transform. The soul also needs that mysterious breath that begins to act once everything has been cleansed, burned, dissolved, and reorganized. You're no longer trying to find your purpose. You begin to be moved by it. This is the point where the ego bows. It doesn't disappear. It simply understands that it's no longer in charge, and when that happens, you become a channel. Ideas come from places you can't explain. Words leave your mouth and you hear yourself with surprise. You look at someone and know exactly what to say. It's not because you studied, it's because you aligned. The soul, now awakened, begins to communicate with the invisible, and the invisible begins to express itself. Through you, many people feel this as a calling to teach, to heal, to write, to create something that once seemed impossible. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that now, what moves within you is greater than you. And this is not a fantasy. It is spiritual life taking form. This stage tends to be subtle, sometimes confusing, because you're still trying to name something that doesn't fit into words. But you feel it, you sense it, and that's already enough. Fermentation is the soul bubbling. It's the new you learning to breathe with the lungs of awareness. It's the invisible whispering, now it's your turn. 6. Distillation. And as that invisible force keeps moving within you, something even more subtle begins to happen. You no longer seek answers outside yourself. You also no longer need to prove that you know, because now truth is no longer information. It is a state. This is where distillation begins. In the language of alchemy, this is the moment when essence is purified through repetition. The fire heats, the water evaporates, condenses, rises, falls, rises again. And with each cycle, only the purest remains. Inside you, the same thing happens. The mind begins to align with the heart. And from that alignment, clarity is born. Not mental, logical clarity, like someone who collects theories, but a quiet, steady clarity, like someone who has already walked through fire and no longer needs to rush. Thoughts begin to organize. Intuition is no longer a hunch, it's a compass. You start to see beyond form. You sense hidden intentions, repeated patterns, energies that reveal themselves without words. You walk through places that used to confuse you and now read everything with the eyes of the soul. This is when you begin to teach, not as someone who feels above others, but as someone who went deep and came back. You speak and people listen, not because you impose yourself, but because your presence carries something that can't be explained. You become a mirror of a truth not read in books, but written into your very body. Every tear, every fall, every silence, all of it now becomes language. And this language doesn't need applause. It only needs to be shared. This is the moment when you begin to live with clarity. You stop letting noise contaminate you. You no longer engage in empty debates. You don't get lost in distractions. You move with purpose. You respond to the world with presence. You speak little, but you speak deeply. Because now, you're no longer just living a journey. You are becoming the map itself. 7. Coagulation. And when clarity settles in, when the mind and heart begin to breathe in the same rhythm, something that once seemed out of reach begins to happen naturally. You no longer ask all the time what you should do. You don't chase after every sign trying to interpret destiny. You no longer need to prove yourself or hide, because now you feel. You feel that something has taken root. This is coagulation, the final stage of the great work, the moment when everything that was separated, burned, dissolved, gathered, and purified becomes solid. The invisible takes form, the spirit anchors in matter, and you stop searching for the light and begin to radiate it. Alchemy has always spoken of the philosopher's stone as a mystery, but the greatest secret is this: the stone was never outside. The stone is you. You, when you stop running from your own shadow. You, when you accept that the human and the divine are not opposites but partners. You, when you start acting like someone who knows they are embodying a purpose, even if you can't explain it in words. At this point, everything that used to be effort becomes presence. You enter a space and something shifts. You say little and yet transform much. You no longer try to convince anyone because you understand that each person awakens in their own time. Coagulation is not an ending. It's a vibrational stability. You become the living presence of all you've walked through. You don't repeat ready-made phrases. You embody truths. The world around you may still look the same. People keep rushing, distracted, afraid, trapped in old cycles. But now, something in you no longer moves with that current. You have become the center, the anchor, the temple. You remember who you were before you forgot, and you finally understand that the search was just a path back home. And now that you've understood why you're here, now that you've started to remember, don't leave yet, because I've prepared a special video for you to go even deeper into this journey. Content that will show you in detail the stages of soul transmutation according to Sacred Alchemy. It's showing up here on the screen now. Click on it, and I'll see you there. What you're about to watch is not just knowledge, it's a mirror of your own crossing. See you on the other side.